So today's our, today's Tuesday, our first day back since the exam, right? You took an exam Thursday? Yeah. Last Thursday, yep. So you did okay?
I passed.
You passed. Well, I guess that's okay. Am I sharing? It's a tough one. There we go. Yeah. Doesn't look like anybody's showing up today. What's up with that? I think everybody dropped. Wow, this is something. I'm in, I don't know what to think. You know,
Nobody?
nobody.
I'm probably with that connection.
The whole class?
Yes.
Let me see. Somebody sent me an email. Let me see what this email says. No, I got some people joining. No. I don't know. It's time to get started. There's nobody attending the Zoom, and I have two students in class. Down to 2. Oh my goodness. So we're going to roll with it. They're all partying?
Yes. Instead of waiting for passing the exam, so yeah.
Yeah, whatever. Okay, let's see. Well, I'm going to pretend like I have an audience. I guess I've never had this happen before. Let's see. Fix this display right here so you guys can see something, and so they can see something. There we go. So good morning. It's a minute after 11 o'clock, Tuesday morning, April 13th, 2021. You guys are biology 1160 section 2, and today's our first meeting since the infamous third exam. Got nobody left. There's no one Zooming today, and I have 2 students in the auditorium. I'm not sure what to think about that, but anyway, it could be just for you guys. You can go back and review it or whatever. Or maybe it's because of the weather. I don't know. People are going to view this lecture at their leisure, you know. Perhaps nobody wants to view it live, but anyway, this is the beginning of material for your final exam. Respiratory system, which originally used to be on the third exam. You know, imagine that you have one more PowerPoint on the third exam, and make it really rough. But that was my attempt back in the day to kind of ease the burden on that third exam by, chopping off some of it. So that's what I did. I chopped off the respiratory and stuck it on the final. If you look at it, it makes sense. The respiratory system and circulatory system should go together, because it's often treated like, 2 systems in one, like cardiopulmonary system, which is heart and lungs. But your book in this class, we separated out the circulatory system or the cardiovascular system, same thing, separated it from the respiratory system. So the respiratory system, it's just the structures associated for respiration or gas exchange, and we'll talk about that. But I don't know. I put this on the 4th test, and the averages on the 3rd exam are still pretty kind of shaky, you know, so they're not too good. But anyway, so your finals starts with today. Well, it's comprehensive, but the you know, the first 50 questions I think come from these last 4 PowerPoints. There's 13 PowerPoints, but this one, the respiratory system, urinary system, digestive system, and reproductive system, those are your last 4. And that'll be, you know, the first half of your final exam. And then last half is the comprehensive portion, but the comprehensive portion, I know that usually frightens students, you know, oh no, comprehensive test, but you'll probably do better on the comprehensive portion than you will on the last segment. It's like the last comprehensive portion, actually including that in the final, actually brings the averages up. So with the addition of that, it should help you grade out, you know, because you're it's a 200-point exam. You know, it's like 100 points from this last part, and then 100 points from the comprehensive part. But most students, they do well in the comprehensive portion, and then helps out their grade. So I kind of design it like that. You know, I didn't used to give comprehensive exams, but I have to now. Well, a few years ago, the Board of Regents made it mandatory that to get college credit for a course, you know, all exams have to be comprehensive. You know. So there we go. I made it comprehensive by asking questions from the first 3 exams. That's what I did. And I didn't select hard questions. I selected what I thought were, you know, fair questions that most students understood. And hopefully you got it right the first time, you get it right the second time as well. And it'll help out your grade. So that's the idea. So anyway, there you go. So let's talk about the respiratory system. This is a short, actually respiratory and urinary, pretty short PowerPoints, short lectures. We'll probably finish this today. But the digestive and reproductive are pretty healthy. We'll look at those later. Anyway, the respiratory system. So what is the respiratory system? Well, there's a few definitions we need to hammer out and understand. It's like, what exactly is respiration? Well, associated with respiration is, first of all, ventilation, or what you might call breathing. And you have anatomical structures associated with ventilation or breathing. And that is the physical movement of air into and out of your body. But that's not necessarily respiration, okay? Respiration, number 2, is the exchanging of gases, or gas exchange, if you want to say it like that. And when we're talking about gas exchange, we're talking about oxygen for carbon dioxide. That's respiration. And you require oxygen, you know, in your body. And so it diffuses, you know, from the outside atmosphere into your body and into your cells that need the oxygen to operate, you know, and they produce a byproduct or a waste product in the form of carbon dioxide or CO2. And so there's an exchange. You get oxygen from the atmosphere, and then you take that waste product and put it back into the atmosphere from the body, okay? Now, gas exchange, respiration, you have 2 different types of respiration or gas exchange. You have what we call external respiration. And external respiration is the gas exchange that takes place between the atmosphere, the outside air, and your blood, okay? So from the outside world into the circulatory system. And you go, gosh, where does that take place? I don't have just like blood exposed to the outside world. Well, you do on a respiratory surface in your lungs. That's what your lungs are for. In your lungs, there's a respiratory surface where the atmospheric air comes in contact with the blood, and you get oxygen diffusing into the blood from the air, and then from the blood, CO2 into the air sacs of the lungs, and of course, then out again, okay? That's external respiration. Now, there's internal respiration. I know in your lungs seems internal, but the spaces in your lungs are continuous with the outside world. Think about that, okay? But once the oxygen gets into your blood, it's inside your body, all right? And then what does it do once it's in your blood? Well, why do you have blood? You know, the circulatory system is to transport material throughout your body. You know, nutrients, waste products, and respiratory gases. And so it transports that oxygen to the tissues of your body. And so from the blood to the tissues is internal respiration. Okay, so that's the difference. External between the atmosphere and the blood, internal between the blood and the tissues. Great. So the oxygen gets into the tissues. And now what? Why do you even need oxygen? What's, of all the elements and gases that are out there in the universe, what's so special about O2? Well, that's beyond the scope of this course, because you're going to get into physiology. You'll actually see what happens like at the cellular and chemical level of oxygen. You know, why you use oxygen, what happens with the gas molecules in the cell, okay? And the cell uses it to work, to metabolize things. And so cellular metabolism or cellular respiration is what's actually taking place. The actual physiological processes that are involving oxygen at the cellular level. And so there's, you know, really three types of respiration, if you would. Internal respiration, external respiration, and cellular respiration. Okay, external, of course, like I said, between the atmosphere and the blood, internal between the blood and the tissues, and then cellular respiration is the actual cellular metabolism or what's happening inside the cell at the cellular level. That's all the metabolic pathways and all that stuff that you're gonna learn in physiology, which I don't talk about in here. Okay, but that's your little background on respiration, all right? Now let's talk about some anatomy. Now, the respiratory system, it's really not that complicated. At least I'm not going to try to make it too complicated. There's a couple of different ways you can view the features of the respiratory system. You like from a physiological standpoint or an anatomical standpoint. And so there's a couple of different, what they call divisions, you know, of the respiratory system. There's a functional division. I guess that's more at physiology, where you got portions of the respiratory system are considered the conducting division. And conducting, and that's just the passages for the respiratory gases, you know, from the outside world into your body, and then from inside the body out again. And so that would include, you know, structures of the conducting division would include everything from your nostrils, you know, your nose and so forth, all the way down into the lungs in the bronchial. So all the hollow spaces that would come in contact with the gases would be a part of the conducting division. And so what else is there? Well, in this kind of classification scheme, you would just have structures of the conducting division, and then the respiratory division, which would be just the structures that are actually involved in respiration or gas exchange. And they're really the only thing that's involved in gas exchange would be the air sacs of the lungs, or the alveoli. The alveoli are the true respiratory surface. The respiratory surface is where oxygen is actually passing through and is being exchanged for carbon dioxide. And the only place that takes place is in the alveoli of the lungs. We're talking about true respiration, okay? A lot of things can have respiratory surfaces other than alveoli. When you think of like the lungs, the air sacs of the lungs, alveoli, that's a respiratory surface, but not everything has lungs, right? You know, some things have gills, but the gills serve as the respiratory surface because that's where oxygen is being exchanged for carbon dioxide. Some things don't have lungs or gills. Some things just have gas exchange right through their skin or right through their integument or the outer covering or cuticle or whatever you want to call it. And so in that case, for example, you know, if a real small invertebrate, you know, some kind of protozoan or some kind of other small, simple form of life, you don't have lungs, you don't have gills, you just got gas exchange just straight through your surface. But is there an example of like a vertebrate that does that? You know, something a little bit bigger, you know? But there are lungless salamanders, believe it or not. They don't have lungs, they don't have gills, they don't, how do they breathe? How do they do respiration? Well, their respiratory surface is their skin, their integument. And so they practice what we call cutaneous respiration. Cutaneous respiration is the exchange of gas right through the skin. And because they can do that, because they're small enough and their skin is delicate enough where they can sustain themselves with gas exchange right through the skin. Now, mammals, we're too thick, right? And too keratinized. You know, we have this outer covering, you know, that keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. Nothing can hardly penetrate it. There is a little bit of gas exchange that can occur through your skin. So mammals can practice a small amount of cutaneous respiration, but not enough, wouldn't be sufficient enough, you know, to sustain you for life. So we have to supplement our gas exchange with the formation of lungs. And that's true for most vertebrates, right? So anyway, there's that division. Now, how are we going to study it? Well, since it's an anatomy course, we're going to study the anatomical divisions of the respiratory system. This is most typical when you're talking about the anatomy of the respiratory system. The anatomical division, you have an upper and lower respiratory tract. The upper respiratory tract is everything from your nose all the way down to your larynx. Your larynx, of course, that's your voice box, okay? And your voice box or your larynx is basically just the top part of your windpipe or your trachea. And so from the trachea all the way down to the lungs would constitute the lower respiratory tract. So that's it. You got structures of the upper respiratory tract and lower respiratory tract. And we're going to look at all these things. And so, you know, it's kind of like a classification scheme. So we'll talk about structures of the nose and work our way down through the other features of the upper respiratory tract, and then do the same thing with the lower respiratory tract, okay? So let's do that. Structures of the upper respiratory tract, beginning with the nose. It's a four-letter word, nose, N-O-S-E. Doesn't sound very technical or anatomical, like, doesn't sound very scientific-y. Your nose. Well, if you want to give it something with some more meat that makes it sound like you're educated talking about this structure, call it your respiratory aperture. At least that's what I call it. Your respiratory aperture. Because if you think about what it is, it's designed there really to, I mean, that's its main function, is to bring air. That's the portion where air is going to enter into your body and then exit. Okay. Now, because of this, it takes on some other functions, some, I guess, accessory functions, so to speak. So here I have general functions of the nose or the respiratory aperture. Like if you ask someone on the street, hey, what's your nose for? What are most people going to say? What do you do with your nose? Well, let's sniff with that. It smells like coffee or Smells like, oh my God, what did you eat? Do your mask smell bad? You wash your mask? You do? Mine smells like fabric softener or something. Doesn't smell too bad. You know why it doesn't smell real bad? Because I never wear it. It's just all for show. From my office to the auditorium, or it's like this, or like hanging from my ear or something. I've been fully vaccinated. Got all my sticks, all my ouchie wouchies, or what do you call it? Ouchie fouchies. Oh, did y'all hear about the J&J one? It's giving people blood clots in their brain. No, I don't know. Anyway, there's different. You got different options. Did y'all get vaccinated? Did you get a shot?
I tried to like register here, but no website.
Yeah, I think the rumor was that they were getting J&J here, but I don't know. You don't want it? Yeah, nobody wants J&J. I think that's the one that was coming here. And at first, everybody wanted it. It was, oh, just one shot. But then they had problems with it. And then the Catholic Church was having issues with it. They said, no, you can't get this, because it's made from aborted babies. Anyway, my wife wouldn't let me get that shot. Anyway, so I had to get the 2 Pfizer shots. Both my,
Where do you think?
I got one in this arm and one in this arm. Oh, I did in Lake Charles. Yeah. My arm is still sore. I've never had any issues, Anyway, let's talk about this. How do we get on that? I don't know. General functions. Oh, I was talking about my mask. It's not hard to get Mr. Williams off on a tangent. So, this is why I was doing that. Smelling, because what do you use your nose for? To smell. Well, if you think about it, like I said, that's not really what your nose is really designed for. But if you're going to have some kind of sensory organ to detect airborne odor molecules, where would you put it? It only makes sense to put it in the nose. So your olfactory mucosa is invested in, actually it's the nasal cavity, but it's gonna be back in here. But we're always talking about I think your book talks about the nose general function for smell by way of the olfactory mucosa, whatever. I don't know. I'm just listing it here so I can list some other things too. This is actually more at the nasal cavity. Here I have, the second one, the nasal mucosa for conditioning inhaled air. This is more a mammalian thing, because mammals, where you're warm-blooded, when you think about that, that allows you, or affords you to be functional on this planet anywhere you want to go. You can breathe just fine here, or the North Pole, the South Pole. You might not be real comfortable. I don't know. It just depends. Those people live comfortably in the North Pole. If you're an Eskimo or whatever, they could breathe, but they couldn't do it without a modified mammalian nasal cavity. Okay, because the nasal mucosa, if you look inside of here, it's all covered. We're going to talk about this more in detail when we look at the structures of the nasal cavity, but your air that's coming in through your nostrils here is entering this environment that's warm and moist. And so the air that's passing through the nasal cavity on its way to your lungs is going to be heated and humidified, because you don't want cold, dry air being introduced to your respiratory surface, because gas exchange doesn't take place in dry environments. Okay, I mean that's why you for oxygen to transfer and get into the blood, water has to be involved, and so you need a moist surface. Okay, and so your nasal cavity, your nose, that's its function. The mammalian nose is to condition the air. It heats and humidifies it as it comes in. And then actually it dehumidifies and cools the air on its way out. Now, that's not, the efficiency of that varies from one mammal to the next. Like for humans, we don't really have a nose, and anybody would agree with this, I would think, like compared to most other mammals. Like, would you compare your nose to a dog's nose? You know, as far as efficiency, as far as smelling and conditioning air and stuff? No. I mean, first of all, most other mammals have a pretty sizable schnoz, right? A pretty big nose. Humans, we've kind of sacrificed our nose for other important things in our head. For example, a larger cranial cavity, you know. So anyway, the efficiency of ours, heating air and cooling air, doesn't work that great, but most other mammals it does. Anyway, but that's a function of it. This is probably the most significant in humans. Your nose serves as a resonating chamber in voice production. You thought about that? When you speak, you know, maybe some songbirds. I was thinking, what's the only other chatty animal, you know? They're very chatty, making a song or a sound or some kind of voice of some sort for communication. I wouldn't think anything communicates more than humans using their being able to speak, right? And there's all kinds of things involved in speaking and communication. You know, how you can change the tone and the intensity and how loud your voice is, whisper, and you close your nose, you sound different. You go like this, can you go like that? And so you probably didn't think about that, how significant your nose is in voice production. When you're speaking, you think the sound is coming out of your mouth, but the movement of the air in and out of your nasal cavity also plays a part in how your voice sounds. Anyway, that's what that is. So, general features or functions of the nose. Now, here we're going to look at some external structures. You look at the surface anatomy, if you would, or the basic kind of stuff. The first thing they point out here, this place between her eyebrows where she's that bald. You ever thought of that bald spot right there between your eyebrows? And most people have that, right? Unless my son was telling me about some kind of basketball player. He's real famous because he has big unibrow. You know who this is? You know, basketball player. Looks like Bert from Ernie. You know who Bert is from Ernie and Bert? Sesame Street. Does he have an unibrow? Well, you know, that's okay, I guess, if you have an unibrow, but most humans lack hair right there between the eyebrows. That's the root of the nose. Well, the root of the nose is basically that portion of your forehead. That's the frontal, behind that is the frontal bone, okay? And on a skull, that portion of the skull, but between where your eyebrows would be occur, you know, superficial to that, this area right there is called the glabella. Glabella, glabella. Glabella means bare or naked, in the sense that there's, you know, that's the naked part of your forehead, in the sense that there's no hair there, unless you're some kind of basketball player or a Muppet. I don't want to offend anybody. I had a classmate when I was in school, went all through school, first grade through high school. She had an unibrow. She was a girl, had unibrow. Well, until around sixth grade, she decided to start shaving her eyebrow, shaving a little space right there. So I said, Kathy, what happened to your eyebrow? You have two, you used to have one. She goes, shut up. She didn't like that. People are sensitive about that. Well, you know, it's, I don't know. People are, remember I talked about the function of the eyebrows? It's all in communication because you look, that's part of your face, right? And it's just one of those features, you know, I guess you need them, but your book, a lot of books try to say that, oh, their function is more physiological and so forth, to keep sweat out of your eyes and act as a visor. Oh, that's all bull. It's just for communication. People sculpt them, you know, pick them and pluck, 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 whatever, guys and girls, right? Or like my aunt had hers permanently removed only to be tattooed back in. She's like Bozo the Clown. Anyway, so right here, the root of your nose. The bridge of your nose is where the part of your nose, you know, the part of your nose where you have, we're going to look at the inside where your nasal bones take over, forming the portion that's actually between your eyes. Then the dorsum nasi, see that remember dorsum means back, nasi means nose. And so that's just the, like the ridge of your nose, like the top part of your nose. And the apex of anything is like the tip, that's just, you know, if you have a pointed nose, I guess, but the tip of your nose right there is the apex. The alae nasi, that's the lateral nostrils, so to speak. This where there's no cartilage in there. That you flare your nostrils, that's the part that can move. Okay. And then I mean, I guess there's other things too, but I just pointed out these main ones. Then the external nasal septum, that's the partition that separates and allows you to have two nostrils instead of one. You know, is there creatures that have just one nostril? Yeah, nothing that you're. Some primitive things have like just one nostril, but most vertebrates and creatures that you're familiar with have two nostrils, and there's some kind of septum there. Okay, the internal framework. Now, if you look like what the nose is made out of, there's three main things. You got bone, you got cartilage, and then fibroconnective tissue. The bone, two main bones, the maxillae and nasal bones. They don't label the maxillae, but man, that's your upper jaw bone. So underneath here, the nasal bones would be articulating with the nasal bones would be articulating with the maxillae down here. Of course, up here would be the frontal bone, and up here would be your glabella, right? So those are the two bones. Most of your nose, if you look at it, the bulk of it is not bone. It's mostly cartilage, and all the blue stuff you see is cartilage. You have two different types of cartilages. We call nasal cartilages. You got lateral and alar cartilages. These are the lateral alars for the alae nasi. They're the ones associated with the nostrils, so to speak. And then the septal cartilage in the middle. That's like the part of the dorsum nasi. It's going to be continuous with those processes of the ethmoid bone. Remember, the ethmoid bone had a perpendicular plate that kind of sections and forms the medial septum in your nose. And then the vomer. There's two bones that form the internal nasal septum. The vomer itself, the vertical plate of the vomer, and then the perpendicular plate of the ethmoid. Well, that's bone, but this cartilage is continuous with that. Okay. And then, so you get bone, you get cartilage, and everything else is fibroconnective tissue, this kind of purplish looking tissue right here on the sides. Forms the alae nasi, the lateral walls of the nares or the nostrils. And that's it. Okay. So that's your nose. Now we move in to the features of the nasal cavity, the space that's in there. And we define the nasal cavity as everything between your internal nostrils and your external nostrils. Your external nostrils are your external nares. You know, that's the opening from the outside. All the way to the back right here, where it opens up into your throat. The opening into your throat, there will be two openings, just like you got two openings on the outside, there's two on the inside. And then of course there's the septum in the center separating the two. The openings on the inside are also called choanae, or singular would be a choana without the E on the end. You see that look right here. It says posterior nasal, posterior nares, or choana. It's hard to appreciate what you're looking at, but it'd be a hole, but it's cut, and so you're looking in the side of it, so it doesn't really look like a hole. But imagine an opening just like this in the back. Another way you can look at this, remember looking at the inferior view of the skull. If you look at the palate, the roof of the mouth of the skull, you tilt it up, and you can look underneath. I guess I should include a picture of this. Remember where we looked at the vomer bone? Remember the vomer attaches to the sphenoid bone? And it comes up and it attaches to the roof of the mouth. Well, you got those two spaces on either side of the vomer. Those are the choanae, or internal nares. All right. What are some features associated with the nasal cavity? First, the nasal vestibule with vibrissae. Vibrissae are guard hairs. You know, what's a nasal vestibule? There's this word again. They like to use this word a lot in anatomy, a vestibule. And I probably told you this before, like in architecture or like in a building, the vestibule of a building, like the science building has a vestibule. You know where the vestibule is for the science building? Do you know? Do you know? Outside the auditorium, there's those offices, and then there's doors to go outside. You know, notice there's two sets of doors. You ever notice that? There's glass doors you go through, and you're not inside, you're not outside. You have to go through another set of doors. Why do they do that? You have to go through two doors, really? One's not enough. You got to go through two. You ever wonder why they did that? Why don't they just have one door to go outside? Well, actually, that has a functional significance for climate control. It's to help preserve the air inside, you know, and so you go through two sets of doors, and you know it keeps the outside air out and the inside air in. Anyway, the space between those two sets of doors is called a vestibule. If a building has a vestibule, like a lot of banks will have vestibules. You go through a set of doors and you're in a little room, and you have to go through another set of doors. That's a climate control and for security. So like if you're like robbing a bank and you're exiting, they can lock both those. They'll trap you in there and wait for the cops to come. You go, let me out. Bulletproof glass. Thieves are stupid. Don't be stupid. Don't rob a bank. But anyway, they're going to trap you in the vestibule. So why am I telling you all this? Well, because of this word, vestibule. And anytime you see it in anatomy, it's always associated with an entryway. Remember the vestibulocochlear nerve, which is cranial nerve number 8. The vestibule, it's named after the cochlea, that snail shell shaped structure, and the vestibule of the ear. Remember that? There's a vestibule in the ear, the inner ear. And that's where things enter, right? Things come in, things go out. And so, and we'll see in other parts of the body, there's this kind of vestibule and that kind of vestibule. And it's always where stuff goes in and out. And so here, the nasal vestibule, this is the first little chamber. That's what you might call your little booger chamber. And you notice between your septum and your ali nasi, there's a little space there that has hair, vibrissae. The vibrissae, or guard hairs, only occur in the vestibule. Okay, you don't have hair up in the nasal cavity up here, only in there. And the size of your nostril is the same size as the tip of your finger. You ever thought about that? It's like that for a reason, because it's designed to be picked. Well, it may be, because if you think about it, you only got hair there, in there, and since it's just beyond the vestibule, you got that warm environment with warm, wet surfaces in here. Remember, you're going to humidify the air before it goes to the lungs. Well, you're breathing in, you're breathing out, and so the hair that's in the vestibule, your guard hairs, they're going to be moist. They're going to be tacky, at least. And then as you're breathing in air, because you look across any kind of space, you go, oh, it looks pretty clear or whatever. But there's always, always, always going to be particulate matters in the air. Viral particles, pollen, spores, dust, whatever, just stuff in the air. And of course, it's going to come in and it's going to come in contact with your vibrissae and hopefully get stuck to it. And so this is basically your respiratory system's first line of defense in filtering the air. And so it traps that particulate matter on your nose hairs and it cleans it. So that it cleans the air, and as it's coming in, and then down the more distal, there are other structures that do some fine tuning as far as cleaning the air in your lungs. But this is the initial side. And of course, over time, you're going to accumulate debris on your hairs. And what was it, accumulated debris called? Boogers, she says. Is there a technical term for booger? I don't know. You talk to an ENT, an ear, nose, and throat person, and they'll call them the booger. I've had surgery on my nose before. If you ever had nose surgery, oh my gosh, they work and then they stuff gauze up. It feels like it's going into your brain, and then when it comes out, it really feels like the part of your brain's coming with it. And it had stitches in there, and removing stitches and come out, and then I look, and he was taking the stitches out, and there was stuff on the stitches, and I said, "What is that?" It's a booger. You call it a booger too? Does it have another name besides booger? You're a professional, No, it's just booger. I don't know. At least if there is another name, I don't know what it is. But maybe you can Google what's the technical term for a booger, or talk to your ENT. Anyway, that's this. Nasal vestibule with vibrissae. What else? Well, you can't see it here because this is a parasagittal section of the skull. Remember, mid-sagittal is right down the middle. Parasagittal is off to one side. So this has to be a parasagittal section so you can see this lateral wall without, the septum being in the way. So, but there is a internal nasal septum, the medial wall that separates the nasal cavity into left and right halves. Again, it itself is formed from two bones, the ethmoid bone and the vomer bone, and the septal cartilages contributes to the internal nasal septum. The halves of the nasal cavity are called fossae. So you have a left and right fossus, or nasal chamber, if you would, something like that. Okay. The conchae, basically the lateral walls, and that's what you're looking at. You're looking at this would be the left lateral wall, medial view looking out towards the left. And this is the lateral wall, and you see these folds on there. Now, it looks like folds right here because everything's covered with mucosa, but what you're really looking at are the turbinate bones. Remember we talked about turbinate bones, and we were talking about the ethmoid bone and the inferior nasal concha and all that kind of stuff. Well, that's what you're looking at. The superior nasal concha, which, remember, it's a cranial bone. It's actually a cranial bone process of the ethmoid bone. You have 6 turbinate bones, but it's technically only 3 different bones. It's 3 pairs of turbinate bones. What you're looking at, this is the top little fold right up there is the superior nasal concha of the ethmoid bone. The second fold, much bigger right here, see that one? That's the middle nasal concha, which is also a part of the ethmoid bone, which is a cranial bone, it's part of the cranium. And then finally, this one on the bottom is the inferior nasal concha. But remember, the inferior nasal conchae, they are separate, independent facial bones. It's considered part of the face. And so these articulate with the maxillae. Remember your upper jawbone inside, they're attached right there. They're to the maxilla. So this is all ethmoid bone up here, and then down here, the inferior nasal concha is separate little facial bone. But collectively, those are the turbinate bones. All right. Do not confuse nasal conchae with nasal meatices, because a lot of times students will look at this, say, oh, look, meatices, and they're pointing at stuff. They think they're pointing at these 3 folds. They're not. A meatus is it's like a passageway, like a tunnel, all right? And what this is the passage for air, like a groove underneath, corresponding with each concha. So you have underneath the superior nasal concha, you have a superior meatus, likewise. And then there's a middle meatus underneath the middle nasal concha, and then there's a inferior meatus underneath the inferior nasal concha, okay? And again, that's where air flows. Because you remember, without all of these processes, these folds in the nasal cavity, it would just be a big hollow space, okay? It'd be like breathing just through your mouth. Are you a mouth breather? You don't want to be a mouth breather, do you? There's something wrong if you're a mouth breather. But you breathe through your nose. You have no surface area in there. But in the nasal cavity, you got all this extra surface area, more surface area. You maximize the surface area for that cold, dry air to come in contact with the warm, moist surface. So that's the idea. The more surface area you have, the better chance that air is going to be heated and humidified before it reaches your lungs. That's the whole idea. Isn't that beautiful? Not everything has this. Like a frog, frog's nostrils, just nothing. There's a hole on the outside, there's a hole just opens up into their mouth. They don't even have a palate, okay? Alligator has a little bit of a palate, but nothing to heat and humidify air, because, well, alligators and reptiles and amphibians and fish, all cold-blooded, right? They don't have to do that. In the wintertime, they don't breathe the cold air. They just go to sleep and wait for it to warm up again, right? Okay, what's next? The pharynx. The pharynx, or the throat, okay? This part of your body serves 2 body systems. It serves the respiratory system and it serves the digestive system. And we'll talk about it in both systems. And so here, I tell you, the pharynx, or the throat, connects the nasal and oral cavities. Of course, nasal for the respiratory system, oral cavity for the digestive system. Its function is basically to route material into the correct pathways. You know, the nasal air is going in the nasal cavity, but it has to reach your trachea. So the function of the throat, or the pharynx, is to ensure that the air, right, makes it into the correct passageway into the trachea, and then the oral cavity, your food, doesn't end up in your trachea, ends up in your esophagus. Because you look at this down here, this is a pretty precarious arrangement right here. Here's your nasal cavity, right? Right here's your oral cavity. A little bit of space, there's a big old tongue right there in the roof of the mouth. The space right there where food would go. Then it opens up into the throat. the nasal cavity opens up into the throat. So you're got both, there's a portion of your throat or your pharynx where both air and food are together, or could be potentially, but it's rerouted air to come forward like this, and then food to go in the back like that. That seems like a terrible design, you know? You like, air has to go like this, food has to go like this. It's like a potential choking hazard. But with your pharynx, it all works out, you know? You have food, it comes back here into this blue area. That's going to be the esophagus, and then air from here into the trachea right here. So when we talk about more, I think when we get into the digestive system, we'll talk more about the function, what's going on during swallowing. But here for breathing, we just talk about air passing through the throat. Okay, so well, like you might expect, you see how everything's nice and color coordinated. We have 3 distinct regions of the pharynx, and it's pretty easy. They're all kind of just named after the cavity that they're associated with. Because remember, nasal cavity, oral cavity, and then the opening to your respiratory passageway, basically the opening to your voice box, your larynx, opens up into, all these things open up into the throat. So across from each of these holes, if you would, part of the throat. It's pretty easy. The nasopharynx, right? It's right across from the nasal cavity. It's where the choanae, remember, do I have that word up here? It serves a passage. No, I don't say that. Remember the opening from the back of the nasal cavity, or the choanae, C-H-O-N-A-E, I think. Internal nares, nostrils. That's where they open them to the throat. So if you're standing in the nasal cavity and looking back, that's what you would see. You would see the nasopharynx. Great. So why do we even bother naming this? You know, well, just something else for anatomy students to memorize, I guess. No, that's it's more than that. There are some noteworthy features associated with the nasopharynx. For example, the histology of the nasopharynx is different than any other part of the throat. It's continuous with what's inside of the nasal cavity. Okay, so it's a simple epithelium, all right, and that makes sense because you normally only have air running through there. It doesn't need to be stratified and heavy duty because you're not going to have material like that coming in contact with it. Other noteworthy items are, it's not labeled here, but you see that little dark little spot right there? What that is the eustachian orifice. See that? Eustachian orifices. There's 2, one from each eustachian tube, or remember the pharyngotympanic tubes? The pharyngotympanic tubes or the eustachian tubes are those tubes or ducts that connect to the tympanic cavity or the middle ear. So the middle ear cavity. So if you entered that opening, you would end up behind the eardrum. So this is where your middle ear opens into the nasopharynx. Okay, right there. Also noteworthy, see this kind of spongy looking mass right here, glandular looking material. Those are your pharyngeal tonsils. Pharyngeal tonsils are also commonly known as adenoids. What are adenoids or tonsils or whatever? Well, that's lymph tissues, like a lymph node. Okay, what do lymph nodes do? Well, lymph nodes contain lymphocytes, which are white blood cells to help fight infection and so forth. And so what you have here is a strategically positioned lymph tissue, because it's like, again, like one of your first lines of defense against pathogens. Because if pathogens are going to enter your body, where are they going to come in? Well, the opening, where you got a connection to the outside world here. You're breathing in spores and viral particles and bacteria, whatever, coming in here. Well, look what's waiting on you, your defense system right here. So the strategically located lymph tissue right there in the form of your pharyngeal tonsils. Okay, right back there. That's it. Advance. There we go. Second, the oral pharynx, of course. Remember, this is the oral cavity. The opening to the back of the oral cavity that opens up into your throat, it has a name, like the choanae, or the opening from the nasal cavity. The opening from the oral cavity is called the fauces. You have one fauces, you have two choanae, which is the opening into your throat. And so the space back here is just oral pharynx. And it serves as a passage for air, right? And swallowed material. So since you're going to have swallowed material traveling through this, the histology has to change a little bit. So you transition from a simple epithelium to a stratified epithelium. So that's true. Remember, your inner oral cavity is non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium, and as well as your oral pharynx would be the same. Okay. Other structures of interest include some more lymph tissue in the form of two other types of tonsils. You have the palatine tonsils and your lingual tonsils. The palatine tonsils, those are your like normal tonsils, like if you had your tonsils removed, that's probably what you had removed, the palatine tonsils. Those are up in the roof of your mouth on each side, not labeled, but right about here. And then lingual is at the base of the tongue. Again, strategically located because this is kind of like guarding the entry into your body. You know, if you got some pathogenic material entering in your oral cavity, you got these tonsils waiting on you. There's that. And then finally, the laryngeal pharynx, as in larynx, because here's your here's the opening to your voice box. Now, I'm not sure why they put the blue. I would put the blue a little bit higher. I'd start the blue here and stop the blue here. This blue coming down here is actually going down into the esophagus, but just the opening right across from the larynx is the laryngeal pharynx. The opening itself of the larynx is called the glottis, Glottis, glottis. I think we had this word before, or wait, I talked about this once when I was talking about the cranial nerves. I think when I talked about the is that right? Yes, gloss. Is it? What was I talking about? The cranial nerves, glossopharyngeal, no, hypoglot, no, something. Well, maybe just epiglottis. Remember, an epiglottis means above the glottis. This is your epiglottis. This is what closes over the opening. The opening is called the glottis. The word glottis means tongue, but not this kind of tongue. Tongue as in speech, as voice, because that's where your voice comes out, technically, right? This is your voice box. The opening to your voice box, right, is the glottis. And the covering over that is the epiglottis. Anyway, so the opening across from the glottis, laryngeal pharynx. Opening across from the fauces, oral pharynx, and the opening across from the choanae, nasal pharynx. It's an easy way to think about it, right? Kind of, sort of, maybe. All right. Now, for the voice box itself, number 4, the voice box, the larynx. You have a larynx and pharynx. Don't confuse the two. They kind of go together or sound kind of, I guess they have the X with them. Larynx, pharynx, whatever. It's your voice box. And what is it? Well, I just kind of simplify and say, well, it's really just a modified portion of your trachea. So the top part of your trachea is your larynx or your voice box, okay? Here I kind of define its structure. Say it's formed from a framework of 9 cartilages, okay? Remember we talked about different types of cartilages, hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, fibrocartilage, okay? Most of them are hyaline cartilage, except this first one. the epiglottic cartilage is the only one that's elastic cartilage. Remember that I said the elastic cartilage is only two places in your body you're going to have elastic cartilage: epiglottis and your external ear. But you see right here, that's the epiglottic cartilage. And the epiglottic cartilage is what's the skeletal element inside the epiglottis. The epiglottis includes all kind of other superficial soft tissues and so forth. But the skeletal element, the supporting the epiglottis, is the epiglottic cartilage. And that's one of the 9 cartilages in the larynx. Okay. The other cartilages include, well, of course, the epiglottic cartilage is unpaired. The thyroid cartilage, this is the biggest one. It's unpaired, the big one in the front, the thyroid cartilage, named after the thyroid gland, because your thyroid gland would be positioned in this area right here. This is what produces in males this extra process right here, your Adam's apple, which is technically called the laryngeal prominence. It's just a secondary sexual characteristic in males to have this large laryngeal prominence. It's on the thyroid cartilage, okay? And there's also an unpaired cricoid cartilage. Cricoid means ring. It's a circular, goes all the way around. See, here's the front, and it winds around to the back, just like that, okay? Those are all single cartilages. All the other cartilages are paired. So there's left and right, arytenoid cartilages in back sitting on top of the cricoid. On top of those are the carniculate cartilages, which means like little horn, looks like little horns, I guess. And then cuneiform means like little wedge-shaped thing, kind of buried in there, kind of hard to see. But they're all paired. When you count those up, that should be 9 cartilages. And so, like I said, they're all hyaline cartilage except the epiglottic cartilage. And of course, they're there to do a couple of different things. So what do? Functions of your larynx here. Functions. Functions in swallowing acts as a switching mechanism to route air swallowed material into the proper channels. Make sure that food goes where it needs to go and air goes where it needs to go. The glottis is covered by the epiglottis during swallowing, like this right here. Moves down and closes over that to ensure that food doesn't get into your windpipe, okay? Its function in voice production, okay? Look, this is a view. This is a live, not live, but a photo taken of a living individual's larynx with a laryngoscope, the scope to look into your voice box. This is, let's see, this is anterior in the front, and you're looking at it from here. There's anterior, and this is posterior and back. And of course, this would be the right side, this would be left side, okay? And you're looking into the space, in the opening, this view right here, okay? So the voice production, you have the laryngeal mucosa. Everything comes with a mucous membrane, right? There's 2 pairs of vocal ligaments forming the tissue that you have anterior, posterior extensions between these cartilages here. All right, you see there's a fold here and here, then a fold here and here, and cut in sagittal section. You can see the size of them. There's the one at the top and one at the bottom. Here's the one at the top. Here's one at the bottom. Here's the epiglottis in the front. You can barely see it. That's this surface right here. Okay. There's that word vestibular, means of the vestibule. So you have another vestibule. It's another vestibule. Remember I said, what's a vestibule? It's an opening, like as you're getting in. So here we're talking about getting into the larynx or into the respiratory passages. And so right here and here, there's a space right here. This is the vestibule, okay? And so these are the vestibular folds right here and here. Or they're also called false vocal cords. They call them false vocal cords because they don't contribute to sound production at all. Well, what do they do? Why are they there? What are their functions? Well, these actually serve as a second door. Remember, you got two sets of doors. Think of the epiglottis as one door, and then these are the second doors. Okay, and so the space between the epiglottis and these folds is the vestibule, the laryngeal vestibule. And so when you swallow, this closes over this, and then these two things come together. It closes. So these are the vestibular folds closing off the opening into the trachea. Okay, so they don't do anything as far as sound production. The true vocal cords, these tight little bands that are underneath that, you can see them right here, real thin. Those are the true vocal cords, or the vocal folds. Okay, they vibrate in response to the passage of air coming in and out. Of course, you have to be able to breathe, right, to make these work. And of course, they vibrate and makes your voice. Okay, so these are your true vocal cords right here. Ta-da, that's it. Now, that's the upper respiratory tract. Talk about the lower respiratory tract. What's underneath that? Well, once you get to the larynx, the trachea takes over, and everything from the trachea on down is lower respiratory tract. Your trachea is what you commonly refer to as your windpipe. So like, here's your larynx, and so your trachea starts right here, comes down, 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 until it splits. Once it splits, it's no longer trachea. So here I define it as a hollow, flexible tube, about 4.5 inches long, not very long, before it splits, about 1 inch in diameter. It terminates at the carina. The carina means keel. That's a special cartilage at the base that divides it into bronchi, or the first set of bronchi, which are called primary bronchi. Okay, all right. And we'll talk about the different types of bronchi. I guess I could do this and see better. The histology of the trachea. We looked at this, and I always like to look at the trachea in the histology portion of this course, because it's got some cool stuff going on. But here again, I talk about the, look at this. There's a couple of different sections here to view. This is like a sagittal section looking through, and they're looking at the walls, and then cross section here. This is how I usually look at it in lab, when it looks like a little horseshoe right here. So here's the lumen, and then there's the cartilage around supporting it. And so we're looking at the histology on the inside here or right here. That's the mucous membrane, or the laryngeal mucosa. How about that? Remember, histologically, it's pseudostratified ciliary columnar epithelium to produce and propel mucus. And that's what you see here. See this arrow right here? That's going to show the arrow as showing you the direction of mucus from the smallest branches of the bronchi down here up into the trachea. And so it's carrying, it's like a conveyor belt of mucus, carrying that mucus, which is potentially particulate laden. And there's going to be some particles and so forth. They get past your nasal vestibule, right? Your initial filtering system, and get in. And so you got this trash that's coming in. Well, hopefully it'll get stuck to the walls of the trachea, or they even have this down in some of the bronchi as well. It'll get stuck there. And so this helps keep the respiratory passages clean, because you got this, like I said, conveyor belt of mucus with those cilia of the PCC beating and producing that mucus up towards your throat. And so that's the idea, is it keeps it clean, because you don't want a bunch of garbage in there. But speaking of garbage, some people put garbage in their lungs intentionally. You know, like you smoking. You know, so that's okay. I've got PCC to keep everything clean, right? You've got two things to keep it clean. You got the cilia and mucus. You got these mucus producing glands that produce the mucus, along with the goblet cells that are producing mucus as well. But the idea is you got this layer of mucus to catch whatever's being introduced into that environment, like tar from your cigarette, right? But there's a problem. We get your smoke has tar and other garbage in it, but it also has nicotine. Nicotine in a gas introduced to the cilia, you know what it does? It anesthetizes the cilia. So they're beating and making their mucus flow up, but then in the presence of nicotine, it stuns them. So they don't beat. You're smoking your ass off, enjoying your cigarette, but nothing's moving in your respiratory passages. And so it just stays there. And it builds up, and it builds up, and it builds up. And ordinarily, when you're like just day to day, when you're talking, like I always do, I'm always clearing my throat. And then other than hawking a loogie and spitting, most people just swallow. And so your respiratory passages are being cleaned. You clear your throat, you swallow, and it keeps clean. However, it doesn't work for someone who smokes a lot because it just stays there. But your body knows it's in there. And so to clean that, you have to forcefully eject it. That's when you get that very characteristic smoker's cough. You gotta, and so you got to like dislodge that oyster that's in your chest and to expel that, you know. And that's something that smokers have to put up with, I guess. Yeah, like I said, that nicotine stuns those cilia. But if you quit smoking, they'll eventually start beating again. And it varies about how long. I quit. I've been smoking for years, and I quit smoking. You know, my cilia is going to start beating. Well, it takes a little while. Yeah, most people, a week or two, they'll start beating again. You know, without the presence of nicotine, they'll start beating again. But there's a lot of stuff to move, and so you get this sludge that starts coming up, and then it's a problem that, like a lot of people have kicked the habit. They quit smoking. I never used to cough until I quit smoking. I've heard many people say this. So I didn't start coughing until I quit. My sister, one of my sisters, she said, I start coughing so much. I said, screw this, I'm gonna start smoking again. So I quit coughing. So that's what she did. She started smoking again, so she quit coughing. And because what's happening is that stuff is starting to move, and to help eject it, you're being forced to cough and to get it out. And so it takes about a year. That's I think my dad was telling me about this. It takes about a year for your lungs to be totally cleansed, to get everything, all that tar and all that garbage out of your lungs. So you got nice, pristine pink lungs again. So, oh, great, it's only a year and I'll be in the clear. No, you're still a contendant for lung cancer for the next 20 years. That's kind of scary. So, oh, shit. Well, you know, find something else to occupy your time with other than smoking coffin nails. Anyway, so that's the mucosa. What else will tell you, the mucosa of the carina. Remember the little keel at the base down here? That's your the site of well, let's see, if you come in contact with this, that's what initiates the cough response. If you get material, you like aspirate something and you automatically start coughing, well, that's, you stimulated the carina, and that's what it's sensitive to initiate that cough response. Anyway, so this is your mucosa. The sub, you can see right here, and then the submucosa, just underneath it, remember that? That's that fibrous connective tissue deep to the mucosa. It contains more mucus glands, the multicellular mucus glands. And then, remember you always have like 3 layers, mucosa, submucosa, and adventitia. Remember we had cloaks or tunics and that sort of thing, usually 3 histological layers. Remember there's always 3. The adventitia, or the structural, or what do they call the supportive tissue associated with an organ, this would include the outermost connective tissue layer, contains these C-shaped hyaline cartilage rings, or you just call them tracheal rings. This is my little horseshoe. That's one of your tracheal rings. It's hyaline cartilage. It's open in the back. You see that? And in between the openings, or in the opening between each end of the rings, is a band of smooth muscle called the trachealis muscle. Now, the function of the trachealis muscle, most books will tell you, well, it helps you in swallowing. Here, it bridges the gap of the tracheal ring, aids in swallowing. Maybe a little bit, not so much in humans, but because if you think about this, what's back here? Well, that's where your esophagus would be located. Your esophagus is located right there. When you swallow material, your esophagus does most of the work by peristalsis, squeezes and forces food down toward your stomach. This muscle right here doesn't really have much to do with that. In animals non-mammals that swallow, most non-mammals don't masticate or chew up their food. And so masticated food is easier to swallow, and it's introduced into the stomach usually a lot easier than things that don't chew their food. Have you ever seen a snake swallow, like a water snake swallow a fish? It's not instant. Snakes swallowing anything. I don't know, you ever watched, if you're a snake person and you feed snakes mice or whatever, it's not like gulp and they swallow it. It takes a while, right? To swallow and move food down, okay? Things like that, they need some help. And so the trachea actually does help push food down. Humans and other mammals, not so much, but there it is. Okay. The respiratory tree. Look at this. Doesn't that kind of look like a tree? Upside down tree, if this is the trunk and these are all the branches. Well, I call it a tree. I guess it kind of looks like a tree. What is it? Well, here's the carina. Beyond the carina, I guess it kind of looks like a tree. The respiratory passages branch into bronchi. And the bronchi, these branches, just constitute the respiratory tree. And of course, we had divisions of this, and it seems just kind of random, but it is organized. At least the first few portion of it is organized. Divisions of the respiratory tree include, first of all, the primary bronchi. All humans, all mammals, have just two primary bronchi. Primary means first, right? One to the right lung, one to the left lung. And it enters depressions in the lungs called hilus, or a hilum with an M on the end. Sometimes it's spelled like that. But you have two primary bronchi, one per lung. And then each lung in turn is divided into lobes. And so the second division, the divisions of the primary, you think primary, what comes after primary? Secondary. Primary, secondary, tertiary, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All right. So the branches of the primary are called secondary bronchi, or since they are going to a lobe, the secondary bronchi are also called lobar bronchi. Now, you don't have equal number of lobes, but all humans have 5 pulmonary lobes. You have 3 lobes in the right lung, and only 2 in the left lung. So you got 5 lobes, you have 5 secondary bronchi. Does that make sense? 3 in the right, 2 in the left. And again, the secondary bronchi branch, and the branching is consistent per lobe. And so branches of the secondary would be tertiary. The tertiary bronchi actually go to another division of the lung called a bronchopulmonary segment. Each lobe contains a segment. And so these are called segmental bronchi as well. So segmental bronchi, tertiary bronchi, same thing. So you have 1 tertiary bronchus per bronchopulmonary segment. So, oh my gosh, how many of these do it? You have 18, and they all have names. And oh my gosh, this is getting crazy. It's not too bad. But you have 10 bronchopulmonary segments in the right lung and only 8 bronchopulmonary segments in the left lung. So corresponding with each, there's a segmental bronchus. Does that make sense? My God, when does this end? Well, divisions of the tertiary become fourth order. Divisions of the fourth order become fifth order. And then see, it goes on and on and on to 23 orders. And they're all named. No, they're just called bronchi after that. But we call them bronchi. They all divide. These are all within each bronchopulmonary segment. And so they get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until the diameter of the bronchus, when does it become a bronchiole? General rule of thumb, if the diameter of the division is less than 1 millimeter, it's called a bronchiole. There you go. And bronchioles would segue to the air sacs of the lungs or the alveoli, okay? And do I have enough time for this? I got a couple minutes left. It'd be nice to finish. Nah, I don't have enough time. Okay, this would be a good place to stop because I'd like to, there's some explanation that needs to go on at the termination of the tree. I think is that where I want to be? Yeah. Yeah. This is the last slide for what's today? Thursday. Yeah, we'll finish this for sure Thursday and then start the urinary system. But Thursday, we'll talk about the termination of the respiratory tree. Sound like a plan? Okay. There's nobody in there. I'm talking to myself and you two people. Did y'all enjoy class? You did? Okay. I guess everybody else dropped. Did you do well on the third test? About like her? You passed. Okay. Well, hey, if it's any consolation, you'll do better on the next test, I'm sure. And the